Throughout history, there have been tales of ghostly travellers continuing their journeys after death, often in the form of how they travelled in life. Spectral horse-drawn carriages, phantom trains, haunted cars, and ghost ships are all well documented and embedded in myth. But in recent years, a new dimension has been added to this aspect of the paranormal: ghosts in flight. Humanity has been harnessing the benefit of powered flight for over 100 years now, but it has not come without cost of human life. Here are 5 sightings of ghosts that are stuck somewhere between heaven and earth. Hit those lights, sit back, and enjoy. The Bigging Hill Spitfire. Bigging Hill was an RAF station that housed a number of Spitfire fighters during the Second World War, and being located close to the centre of London, it was heavily involved in the fighting during the Battle of Britain. Today, Bigging Hill is home to a museum commemorating the battle, and wartime fighters often fly displays for the public from the historical runway. However, one frequent flyer over the airfield is not on any earthly flight schedule. Since the end of the war, the skies around the base have rumbled with the sound of a Spitfire's Rolls-Royce engine, despite there being no aircraft reportedly flying in the region. Add to this a number of sightings of a solitary Spitfire making its way towards the runway before vanishing into thin air, and one is left with the feeling that at least one of the few is still yet to find the peace he was so desperately fighting for in those dark days. Wittering's crashing ghost bomber. RAF Wittering has long been one of Britain's major military airfields, and during the Second World War, the base was a hive of activity, with British and American warplanes taking off from there on operations over Nazi-occupied Europe. A curious incident occurred one night in August 1944, when a young US soldier on guard duty spotted a bomber apparently coming into land, but its wheels failed to make contact with the tarmac. Instead, it ballooned down the runway before, to the young soldier's horror, he watched it charge into the control tower. Bracing himself for the resulting explosion and fire, he was amazed to find instead that the bomber disappeared in front of him just as it was about to hit the control tower. When he reported the incident to his bemused superiors, the story got around the base, until it was revealed that during the early days of the war, a bomber did indeed crash into the tower in a manner similar to how the soldier described his sighting. Since the war, the new control tower built at the base has had a history of paranormal activity, such as the sound of ghostly footsteps in the stairwells. However, the phantom bomber has so far failed to make another reappearance. The Scabbers. The Airbus A320 series of airliners are among the most prolific types of airliners in scheduled service today. But one example has developed such a reputation for ghostly goings-on that flight crew have nicknamed it the Scabbers. The aircraft in question is registered as OOCOL and operated by Constellation International Airlines. It had no unusual history regarding its construction or operation, until a stewardess became severely ill while going through her pre-flight checks of the cabin. Knowing she was in no fit state to fly, the captain ordered her off the plane. So she got in her car and began to drive home, but sadly she was involved in a collision and died. Ever since then, her spirit is said to have haunted the plane. Cabin crew have reported hearing her voice on numerous occasions whispering to them. Other times, they have reported hearing her screaming in terror, as though she was about to relieve her fatal crash. Additionally, while the A320 is known as a reliable aircraft, OOCOL became notorious for equipment failures following the start of the haunting. The Barnoldswick Lancaster. It's rare for more than a handful of people to encounter a ghost in a single incident, and often they are in groups of friends or family. However, in January 2004, over 30 people, the majority of whom had no connection to one another, came forward with an incredible story concerning what they could only describe as a ghost plane over the skies of Barnoldswick in Yorkshire. The witnesses, some of whom were walking or picnicking in the picturesque countryside, or driving on the road, reported spotting a large 4-engined World War II bomber swoop down out of a thick mist, nearly hitting the ground before pulling up over the road and vanishing. What's even stranger is that while the witnesses clearly reported seeing the propellers turning, the aircraft made no sound as it passed overhead. Most of the witnesses agree that it was a British bomber, and is generally been agreed to be an Avro Lancaster, a common bomber in World War II that was powered by Rolls-Royce engines and manufactured at a site not far from where the ghostly bomber was seen. However, in 2004, there was only one airworthy example in the UK, and it was nowhere near the area at the time of the sighting, nor would it have been performing such daredevil antics if it had. After the news of the sighting broke, others came forward admitting that they had seen almost exactly the same thing several years earlier, meaning the sighting was not an isolated incident. The ghost of Flight 401. This final case is not just fascinating for its aviation setting, it's also one of the most incredible stories of haunting in recorded history, involving many independent witnesses and several aircraft. The story begins in December 1971, when an Eastern Airlines AL-1011 TriStar airliner, Flight 401, crashed into a swamp in Florida. The cause of the accident was traced to a relatively minor flaw in the cockpit design, but one that would cost 101 people their lives. Among those killed was pilot Bob Loft and engineer Don Repo. But it seems both men were not through with this world yet. In the wake of the crash, a number of parts of Flight 401 were salvaged, and then used in other aircraft in the Eastern Airlines fleet. In the years that followed, many of the aircraft that received parts from 401 found they often had an extra crew member or two on board, in the form of the spirits of the dead crew members. At first, crew members who knew the two men reported seeing them during flights, but many chalked these sightings up to mistaken identity, mixed with the emotions of having lost two colleagues. However, it was not long before passengers began reporting seeing them. In one extraordinary incident, a woman found that a man in an Eastern Airlines uniform had somehow managed to sit down next to her without her noticing. Concerned about the rather ill look of the man, who was apparently unconscious, she called the stewardess. Both of them watched in amazement as the man simply faded away in front of them, sending the passenger into a fit of hysterics. Both the stewardess and the passenger later identified him as Don Repo, from pictures shown to them of Eastern Airlines employees. Instead of the two dead men, Repo appeared most frequently to crew and passengers, and apparently wasn't content with just performing disappearing acts. He seemed to be actively trying to prevent another accident, appearing to other flight engineers, reportedly telling them that he had done his own pre-flight check and the aircraft was fine. Perhaps his most dramatic appearance was when a stewardess saw his face in the galley oven, which reportedly was also a piece from Flight 401. The stewardess called another crew member, and the two of them heard the dead man warn them of an impending fire. Later in the flight, the aircraft suffered an engine fire and was forced to land, but fortunately no one was hurt. Over time, the sightings dissipated or were possibly suppressed by Eastern airliners, who were worried about their reputation. And with the drawdown of the TriStar fleet, it's unlikely they will return. So that's 5 haunting aviation stories and encounters with phantom aircrafts. I hope you've enjoyed, and can't get enough of all of these creepy videos. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.